We're back with our political roundtable. Joining me, New York Times columnist and co-author of That Used to Be Us, which is now out in an expanded paperback edition, Tom Friedman, former Republican presidential candidate and Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, presidential historian and author of Team of Rivals. The new paperback edition will be out in October, Doris Kearns Goodwin, former CEO of Hewlett-Packard, now vice chairman of the Republican Senatorial Committee, Carly Fiorina, and NBC News special correspondent and author of The Time of Our Lives, Tom Brokaw. And I'm here having just written an email about 5-10 minutes ago. Welcome to all of you. So much to talk about. Speaker Gingrich, let me go right to you and have you respond to Rahm Emanuel, who said, a lot of nothingness, no new ideas, and a return to the past. That's what you're hearing from the president this weekend, and it's what you just heard from his former chief of staff. How do you see the Republican convention and the effect on the race?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me just talk about the lot of nothingness and return to the past. He's right at one level. We believe in free enterprise. That's been around a long time. We believe in balancing the budget. That's been around a long time. We believe in a work requirement for welfare. That's been around a long time. All those things are better than what Obama's done for 4 years. So, I mean, if he wants to set up a test between, say, Reagan's 1984 campaign, where he didn't mention Jimmy Carter, he didn't explain the failure, he ran it was called Leadership That Is Working was his title. I mean, I think Obama has a hard sell in the next 2 months. And I think the biggest event next week won't be his speech Thursday. It'll be the Friday morning jobs report. And if that Friday morning jobs report is bad, it will drown his speech. They want to talk about Eastwood? Friday morning jobs report is a lot bigger event next week than Clint Eastwood was last week.
And I want to talk about Eastwood, too. But, Tom, first, talk about record. Because I asked Rahm Emanuel this. You see the Democrats run very fast from the sense of, are you better off now than 4 years ago? That's where Mitt Romney wants to keep this race.
Well, absolutely he does. And I think the speech that we ought to be talking about as well is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where Ben Bernanke said we're probably going to have to stimulate the economy again because this unemployment situation is a lot more grave than it's getting the kind of attention that it does. However, to respond to the speaker, even the lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal says by not explaining his agenda, he left an opening for the Democrats. Speaking of Romney, said our point is not so much to throw cold water on Tampa, the afterglow, so much as to point out that sooner or later, Romney and Ryan are going to have to make the case for their policies. My own impression is, David, that out in the country, if anyone's looking to give voice to the frustrations that are there, it would be Cuba Gooding and Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. People feel a sense of betrayal after the last, not just the last 4 years, but the last 12 years. They feel a sense that they've been buffaloed and that they can't believe anything anymore because it always seems to be bait and switch. One quarter it's going to get better, the next quarter it's worse. So I think that's what both campaigns have to address this time. They have to restore the confidence of the American people that they have big ideas that are going to advance the entire country.
You know, Carly Fiorina, you hear Mitt Romney say, I'm going to create 12 million new jobs. You have to know there's so many Americans out there hearing that, to Tom's point, who are saying, really? You really think you're going to do that? How? Because nothing is going to change in Washington.
Yes, but let's talk about a very specific difference. I actually find this critique that Romney hasn't put forward any specifics wrong, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or someone else. An example, President Obama talks about an all-of-the-above energy strategy and then stands in the way of the pipeline.
The Keystone Pipeline.
Romney talks about an all-of-the-above energy policy and lays out crisp specifics, and one of those is to approve immediately the Keystone Pipeline. Most people estimate that would produce over 1 million jobs right there. Is 12 million a big number? Yes. Is it a reasonable and achievable number if the tax code is dramatically simplified and every rate is lowered? Certainly. If the pipeline is approved? Certainly. If states are given more control over their energy policy? Certainly. President Obama, and you're right, Rahm Emanuel ran as far away from that record as he could. Interestingly, when he started talking about the middle class, what did he not talk about? The fact that the middle class has suffered more in the last 4 years of President Obama's administration than in the previous 12. That they don't want to talk about.
Tom?
Well, I think it's unfair to say that Romney wasn't specific. He was very specific. He said he's going to balance the budget, cut taxes, raise defense, protect Medicare, and preserve all the institutions of the federal government that we need, from the FBI to the FAA. You can't possibly do all of those things. That was my problem. How does the math add up? So to me, he's still at war with math. And I think that's where the Wall Street Journal editorial is quite opposite. How are you going to do these things? I believe this time is different. I think the American people really do want a plan. They want one from Romney. They want one from Obama. And I think they will reward someone who they feel has laid down a credible plan. And please, please, don't tell me it isn't going to hurt. There's no way we get out of this hole without it working. They want it to be real. They want it to be fair. The wealthy pay more. Everybody pays something. And they want it to be aspirational. They want it to be not just about balancing the budget, but making this country great.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, there's this appetite for substance, for a credible plan. But campaigns are still, in many cases, about style over substance. Here's the Week magazine, and on the cover it says, unveiling Mitt 2.0, the GOP convention's bid to make Romney more likable. It got you thinking and us thinking about an old button from a previous campaign and the whole idea of Eisenhower, I like Ike. Did he achieve that? Did he come out of the campaign being better liked and seen as more of a credible figure to then get into some of the substance?
In fact, the song was, I like Ike, because Ike is easy to like. But what's interesting about the 20th century is before that, likability was not something that you were running around trying to do. It's the media that brought that about. You have to feel comfortable with the person in your living room. That didn't really start till the mass market newspapers, the radio, and the television. And I think the problem is the convention may have achieved making him more likable, may have achieved making him more decent, but the time that was spent on that probably takes away from a how-to plan. And there is something different between likability. Likability is the outward manifestation of personality. It's different from whether or not you can get in the framework of another person. What Lincoln had famously was that empathetic understanding of, I can understand that person, I know what they're going through, and therefore I'll bring policies that will help them. So yes, he may have become more likable, but that deeper problem of relationship with the people and understanding them, which was brought up again and again in the campaign, has not yet been addressed.
And you know what you need at a good convention? What you need is a bit of a surprise. You need something to catch people off guard, maybe a celebrity like Clint Eastwood to come in. And what I was wondering was whether the folks at The Daily Show and Jon Stewart sat around and looked at each other and said, you've got to be kidding. Did they really do this just for us? Because this was Jon Stewart's take on it on Friday night.
Amidst the tired rhetoric, empty platitudes, and overwrought attacks, a fistful of awesome emerged in the night, where it spent 12 minutes on the most important night of Mitt Romney's life, yelling at a chair. Yes.
You know, David, all I could think of was that in the 1948 election for Truman, if there had been at that convention cameras, they had an equal distraction. They had pigeons up in the Liberty Bell, and they let them loose right before he was supposed to speak. And they were so tied up that they went swooping down. They landed on Speaker Rayburn's head. It was a mess. But we didn't have the media, the Twitter then. That would have taken away from Truman's speech, just as this took away from Romney's decent speech.
Tom, I was sitting next to you. I had the pleasure of seeing you genuinely shocked.
I immediately sent a message to Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live and said, you booked him, right? And he wrote back and he said, no, but you'll be seeing him. 4 years ago, the Republican convention gave Saturday Night Live Sarah Palin. This time we'll be seeing a lot of Clint Eastwood, obviously. Was it a distraction that we're paying too much attention to? I rode up in an elevator with a group of Michigan delegates right after that, and they were very unsettled by his appearance, not just the manner in which he conducted himself, but some of the routines that he had about the president. You want me to tell him to do that to himself? And the next day we were all talking about it. If that had happened, Mr. Speaker, at a Democratic convention in which Barbara Streisand came out and did something similar to a sitting Republican, it would have lit up Fox News and Rush and everybody else. They would have been outraged by it. So it was something that went awry. How long it takes them to get beyond it, I don't know. But it's going to be in the fabric of this campaign on Jon Stewart and Saturday Night Live for a long, long time. And I think, unfortunately for Governor Romney, it did take away a little bit from his big moment coming in because people were still talking about it.
Right. You see it differently?
No, not particularly. I mean, I like Eastwood. I think it was at one level fun to have him there, and it broke up the norm. But I also think you're right to say that you really wanted to build the whole evening around Mitt Romney, to Mitt Romney, through his speech, et cetera. And to some extent, it was a distraction. I think in the long run, it's almost irrelevant. But it's the sort of bump that gives everybody something to tweet about, and it provides lots of fodder. On the other hand, if you're Mitt Romney and your choice is to have Saturday Night Live decide to pick on Clint Eastwood or pick on you, I think I'd give him Clint Eastwood for every night for the rest of his campaign.
Right. Although they have this amazing ability to make room for both, I'm sure. Tom Friedman, there's something else that I think a lot of people are taking on about the Republicans. Whether there was the building of, the myth, factual errors, or the myth that somehow President Obama failed to achieve change because he simply failed, and it wasn't Republicans who stood in the way. And just this morning, there's an interesting set of articles looking at this. I'll just put up the headlines. The Huffington Post with the headline, "Who Killed the Hope? Obama's Descent from Renegade Outsider to D.C. Establishment Man." And also the Washington Post, "Who Stood in the Way of Change?" This cynicism we're talking about does come back to sort of who lost Washington.
Yeah, David, I read all those articles this morning, and I find them interesting because, and one of the critiques I've had of President Obama myself is that one of the lines you get from the White House is, "You don't understand how bad those Republicans are. They've been trying to block us from day one." To which I say, I totally get it. It's obvious to me. I have one question: why are they getting away with it? Why is the American public not sharing your view? And one of the things I've never understood is why the president never leveraged the American people. The last time he leveraged the American people for his big agenda was the day he got elected. And that has been one of the absolute mysteries to me of this administration. A man who's incredibly articulate, who is a great campaigner, who I think had big ideas that he was trying to get through. They have a fight, him and Boehner, over a grand bargain. The thing fizzles out. It's he said, she said. And the president never goes to the American people and says, here was the grand bargain we were going for. Here is why it is so important. Here is why it will lead to jobs. Here is my friend Warren Buffett, who says this is the right thing to do. We never had that.
But on the other side of that, Speaker Gingrich, you were quoted in a book talking on election night, hours after the president's inauguration, laying a foundation with other Republicans about how to block the president's agenda. That's not exactly a down payment on bipartisanship in Washington.
This is one of the great myths of this city. The president got the stimulus plan he wanted with no elected official having read it. He got every single dollar, every single power. The president rammed through Obamacare, the largest change in the size of government in modern times. Got it done. The reason people say he didn't get anything done is it is failing. I mean, liberals can't get up and say, gee, we passed everything we wanted to under the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate, and in 2010 we were repudiated, and by the way, none of it worked.
That's right.
So it's not that he didn't get a lot done.
I don't think you can say the stimulus hasn't worked. Number one, I think that the book is still very much out to that. And we just have, in fact, a new book by Michael Greenwald from Time Magazine arguing just the opposite. And healthcare hasn't been implemented yet. So I think, in fairness, you can't simply say everything you did was
But
fair.
I think what is absolutely fair is to say that President Obama, for 2 years, had a Democratic-controlled Senate and a democratically controlled House. So it wasn't a question of Republican intransigence. They didn't have the power to stand in his way. In 2010, he lost control of the House. He retains control of the Senate. It is President Obama and his administration who have failed to put forward a budget that even members of their own party can support. What I find so curious about this line of reasoning from President Obama and his administration is it makes him look small. Is he really saying that he is only as powerful as Congressman Ryan? I don't think that's what the American people expect of their president. I think they expect their president to lead, to rise above, and he has manifestly not done that. I think what's going to be interesting, whatever you think of the Republican convention, I personally think Clint Eastwood was a mistake before he came out. What I think the Republicans did was offer a performance-based critique of Obama. Here's what hasn't worked. Here's what we think will work. I think what's going to be interesting about the Democratic convention is it a performance-based defense? Is it an idea-based program going forward? Or is it a bunch of adjectives, which is what they've been majoring on recently? Adjectives like mean and out of touch and extreme. Usually more adjectives means less ideas.
Tom?
Yeah, one of the problems I had, in fact, was with that, Carly, with all due respect, was that, for example, Congressman Ryan overreached a couple of times and got caught in those overreaches. The Janesville plant, for example, which was closed in 2008, they ended up blaming it on
never overreached in his rhetoric.
And the cuts in Medicare, which were very similar to what he had in mind, taking on the president for not invoking Simpson Bowles, which I agree with him on that. I think the president made a mistake in not playing up front Simpson Bowles. He was a member of Simpson Bowles, and he voted against it, went on the floor and said it's not a good idea to do it. So I think that's a problem for the Republicans in overreaching. They can make a very good case about the last 4 years, but when they overreach, then the next day's stories are all about the course corrections that have to be made, and I think it goes to their credibility some. And I think the American people are out there looking and saying, I don't know which of these guys to believe, which is going to make those debates all the more important.
I would have had a lot more willingness to listen to some of the critiques if one speaker, and I was there in Tampa, stood up and said, we had a hand in this deficit.
Yeah.
We had a president who for 8 years launched 2 wars, which are the first time in our history we did not pay for with a tax increase but with a tax cut. Passed a Medicare, drug benefit bill that we could not afford. We are in this situation, ladies and gentlemen, because we Republicans and Democrats, there was not an iota. History started the day Obama was elected.
And Doris, you had the only person who talked about bipartisan compromise was Chris Christie,
right,
who said we can and we should achieve bipartisan compromise while still adhering to our conservative principles. But this is what I thought was important. Given everything we're talking about, there was no roadmap for how we get there. Because we've heard about changing the culture in Washington from 2 presidents, both of whom have failed. No roadmap of actually how you go and do the blocking and tackling of getting there.
And I'm not sure either candidate knows how to break that bipartisan problem that we have right now. I think, however, there was a roadmap for Obama's acceptance speech in the reference that Mr. Romney made to Neil Armstrong. And I think you talked about this earlier. Neil Armstrong, as the emblematic notion of an entrepreneur who got to the moon, it's just the opposite. It was government investment and then followed by private innovation. And that's really what's in the stimulus bill. I mean, it may be that it didn't produce the jobs we wanted, but it did invest in education, it did invest in energy, and a lot of those projects worked. All we know about Solyndra, Mr. Obama has not made a good apology, not an apology, a defense of what he actually did, what the health care bill did, what the Dodd-Frank has done. And he has to come out full-throated. If he doesn't believe in the government investment, he has to defend government and defend investment as a down payment for the future and say, if I'm elected, it will go much more forward in this direction. But if he doesn't do it, people can't do it for him. It's up to him.
Newt Gingrich, you campaigned vigorously for the presidency and for the nomination. You have a real sense of this party. If Mitt Romney wants to make big deals where he balances the role of government, maybe even tax increases, more spending, does he now have a vice president, if he becomes president, Paul Ryan, who can go to the recalcitrant elements in the Republican Party and say, look, we got to do this. I can keep you in line because we got to make this big deal?
Well, I was part of a number of big deals in the early 1980s. We got a third of the Democrats to vote with us in the House because Tip O'Neill was Speaker. None of them involved tax increases. Let me just give you one example. We did an entire morning, what they had called Newt University, on energy. And we actually had Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough come to be students, which was a hoot. The next day I did their show, and they both said on the air that the briefing they got from Harold Hamm, who developed North Dakota, changed their entire understanding of American energy policy, that they were blown away by the data. Now, why is that important? The number one item on the Romney plan for the middle class is a North American energy independence, which includes Canada and Mexico. And if you look at the jump in North Dakota from 150 million barrels to 24 billion barrels of reserve, you look at the fact that North Dakota is now the number 2 oil-producing state in the United States. They just announced that they have 42 times, not 42%, 4,200% as much natural gas in Ohio as they thought they did a year ago. I mean, just the drive of the energy sector under a Romney administration generates in royalties and in taxes on new jobs and taxes on profits a major step towards the balanced budget. Now, you've got to control spending. Paul Ryan would be about as good a vice president as you could get if you wanted to have somebody. I mean, he will know more about the budget than the director of the budget.
Quick comment, Tom, and then I got to go to a break.
I'm all for exploiting our natural gas. It's an incredible bounty, but if we don't do it as a bridge to a cleaner energy future, we're going to burn up, choke up, heat up, smoke up, and melt up this planet, okay, far faster than even Al Gore predicts.
All right, we're going to take a break here. I want to come back, talk a little bit about a big issue here as we go into the Democratic convention, gender politics. It was certainly big for the Republicans. It'll be big for the Democrats as well. Our political director, Chuck Todd, will join us from Charlotte and take a look at the map, the battleground map, and explain why this is so important, the women's vote, coming up after this.
When my mom ran for the Senate, my dad was there for her every step of the way. I could still see her saying in her beautiful voice, "Why should women have any less say than men about the great decisions facing our nation?" Don't you wish she could have been here at this convention? And heard leaders like Governor Mary Fallin, Governor Nikki Haley, Governor Susana Martinez, Senator Kelly Ayotte, and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice.
We're back. More with our panel in just a minute. I want to go now to Charlotte, side of the Democratic National Convention. Our political director and White House correspondent Chuck Todd is down there. Chuck, you wrote in your First Read blog this week, if you don't think Republicans understand the power of the gender gap, this convention should have made it very clear. A big emphasis there on reaching out to women. You talked this morning about the importance.
It is, and I can tell you it's the single most important poll number that the Romney folks look at when they go into the field. So let me show you sort of where things stood in 2008 versus where they stand now. As you can see, in 2008, there was a 13-point gender gap advantage for President Obama. Here in our latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll over Mitt Romney, the gap is 10 points. That's about where the Republicans would like things to be. Now, let me show this through the battleground states. In 2008, the president had a larger gap than 13 points in 4 of these states: Nevada, Colorado, Wisconsin, and New Hampshire. In 5 of our toss-up states, he did below that 13-point gap: Iowa, Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. So what does this mean, and how does it feel on the map? I'm going to go to our little battleground map here, and as always, follow along up top. When I make the state changes there, you'll see those numbers change there. So let's just give the president the states where he did better than that 13-point gap nationally. Well, then you would give him Nevada, you'd give him Colorado, Wisconsin, and New Hampshire. And look where it puts him, David. At 266, he just needs one more state. And I can tell you the one that they think they can exploit the gender gap and gender issues more than any other in the rest of those last 5 battlegrounds, and that is Virginia. And as you know, David, just watching television in the Northern Virginia market, you see a lot of ads, particularly that one on Planned Parenthood, they use Mitt Romney's words. They think, particularly in Virginia, as well as with Colorado, that they could exploit the gender gap and get to 270 without winning any other issues.
Chuck Todd, thank you very much. Carly Fiorina, this is so important. Whether the issue is the abortion platform, which is ambiguous about exceptions in the Republican platform, whether it is the issue of Planned Parenthood or Todd Akin in Missouri, this is a real focus.
Yes, it is a real focus. It should be a real focus. I was immensely proud as a Republican woman to see these awesome women leaders that spoke last week. I mean, every single one of them is a bright and shining star in the Republican Party. And I also must say, as a woman, it makes me sad that we continue to treat women as a special interest group. Women are over half of the population. They are not single-issue voters. I know that people feel very strongly about abortion and abortion rights, but to try and pigeonhole women, which I think, frankly, the Democratic Party continues to milk this issue and manipulate women as single-issue voters and say all you care about is abortion, whatever their views are on abortion. Women care about every issue. In the end, the platform frankly doesn't mean much. The Republican Party has pro-choice Republicans, just like the Democratic Party has pro-life Democrats. The Republican Party platform hasn't changed. Todd Akin should go. His comments were about rape, not about abortion, and the Republican Party did the right thing in repudiating him almost universally.
But Doris, as many Republicans as may agree with Carly, the reality is that there are also it's not just Democratic women, there's Republican women who not only hear about a Todd Akin, but who hear about the platform on abortion or hear about some of these other issues and frankly say, look, this is just a party that's out of step with where I am. That's the challenge that you see.
I mean, I think in the end, platform does matter because words last. The visuals of the convention may have been very successful in portraying diverse women who were Republicans, but words last and actions last. And I think what the Democrats are going to be able to do in the fall is to somehow talk about votes on bills that had to do with things that women care about, words in that platform. I mean, it was interesting to me to watch Ann Romney's very good speech, I thought. And yet, even there, she felt compelled to say, I love women, and talk about her husband as a father and a dad. That is such a contrast. The first woman who ever spoke at a convention in 1940, Eleanor Roosevelt, never talked about Franklin's polio, never talked about him as her husband or as a father. She simply said the president cannot be here because there's too much happening in the world at large right now. They were restless. They wanted him there. And she saved that convention. But it's a whole different change. And it wasn't just Ann Romney. We've changed the whole idea, again, to go back to this likability, that we have to present them as human beings. And we have to focus on the platforms, the substance. That's what this election's about.
Well, let me show a little bit of Ann Romney with her own testimonial for her husband before I come to Tom on this question.
A storybook marriage? Nope, not at all. What Mitt Romney and I have is a real marriage. I know this good and decent man for what he is. He's warm and loving and patient. He has tried to live his life with a set of values centered on family, faith, and love of one's fellow man. From the time we were first married, I've seen him spend countless hours helping others. I've seen him drop everything to help a friend in trouble and been there when late-night calls of panic come from a member of our church whose child has been taken to the hospital.
Tom, you made the point this week that we're going to see Ann Romney, we're going to see Michelle Obama as two of the most effective figures in this campaign.
Not two of the most, the two most effective campaigners in both campaigns. I don't think there's any question about that. Michelle Obama will lead it off next week in Charlotte for her husband. I happen to believe, and you know the kind of family in which I have been raised, I'm living with all women, and I have been witness to this, both in my wife and my daughters and now my granddaughters. I think this is the century of women. I really do believe that there's going to be more gains made by more women across every part of our lives, cultural, political, and economic. And I think that there is, even among some Republican women out there, that party doesn't quite buy into that yet. I mean, there are extraordinary achievements made by Nikki Haley and Condi Rice and everyone else. But the real issue in this campaign for women will social issues or economic issues, will one trump the other? Because the social issues are very important to women. It's their bodies, their lives. They feel that it's not entirely embraced by the Republican Party. And that's my own judgment.
Understanding, Mr. Speaker, the difference between Todd Akin talking about rape versus the abortion plank in the platform, I understand there is that distinction. Nevertheless, the question, social issues versus economic issues, as being a big motivator for women, is a question.
Let me just take a second and disagree with Carly. I think Todd Akin was the choice of the people of Missouri. I think Todd Akin has publicly apologized. And I think that, and the last poll shows he's beating the Democratic senator. I think that we ought to go on from that. Karl Rove said some terrible things on Friday for which he has apologized, which should remind us. People make mistakes. Vice President of the United States.
He was joking about if he shows up, murdered somewhere.
No, and in the age of Gabby Giffords, it is not a joke to say that a member of Congress ought to get murdered.
Yeah.
And I'm frankly fed up with the one-sided bias, okay? Let me give you two examples. Vice President of the United States goes to a black audience and says, if the Republicans win, you will be in chains. Now, how can Biden remain as vice president? Where's the outrage over deliberate racism? You know, we talk about people saying things they ought to get off tickets. How come Biden shouldn't get off a ticket? Second example, the Democratic Party plank on abortion is the most extreme plank in the United States. The President of the United States voted 3 times to protect the right of doctors to kill babies who came out of an abortion still alive. That plank says tax-paid abortion at any moment meaning partial birth abortion. That's a 20% issue. The vast majority of women do not believe that taxpayers should pay to abort a child in the 8th and 9th month. Now, why isn't it shocking that the Democrats on the social issue of abortion have taken the most extreme position in this country, and they couldn't defend that position for a day if it was made clear and vivid as all the effort is made to paint Republicans?
I'm a Planned Parenthood Democrat on the issue of choice, and I think that is where the country should be. That is where many, many women in this country are, and I am glad there are people running for the presidency who will defend that position. Period. Paragraph. End it.
Newt, I guess the question, too, is whether you're seeking, even in the Aiken example, of this kind of, to seek an equivalency between that and, say, Biden, who was using language that Republicans have used about, the regulatory shackles, as opposed to making an overt
Biden was not talking to a black audience about regulatory shackles. Okay, but I'm making. Let me go back to Tom's point, because so you think it's acceptable to have a party committed to tax-paid abortion in the 8th and 9th month? And you think that's a sustainable position in the United States if the news media spend as much time on the extremism of the Democrats as they spend trying to attack us? They would not be able to adopt that plank this week.
Yeah, I do believe that's a defensible position, but I also believe I'm here as a journalist. I'll let the Democratic Party defend it.
But also, Doris, part of this is that whatever the Speaker's views are, this is not the battle that Mitt Romney wants to have. He does not want to get into this, to the Democratic plank versus the Republican plank, and he certainly is not defending Todd Aiken. You're the first Republican, frankly, Newt, I've heard who said that he should stay in the race. But the party is very much in a different place than you are.
No.
Well, they are. They clearly are.
When a majority of the people of Missouri on Friday, in the latest PPP poll, said he should stay on the ticket, a majority of Democrats, majority of Republicans, majority of Independents, he won the primary. Now, for Washington figures, remember, the same Washington figures who last time wanted to kick off Marco Rubio for Charlie Crist, who will be in Charlotte, I just think that people ought to be a little cautious about saying the voters of Missouri don't count.
Have you talked to the Congressman Aiken?
No.
But
Aiken has publicly apologized. He has said he made a mistake. And I'm not trying to spend the whole show on this. I'm just saying there's a very one-sided model here. Romney doesn't particularly want this argument, but the argument's not going to be avoidable. And I'm just making the case Republicans can win. If Republicans communicate the Democratic Party plank on abortion, Republicans actually win that fight. If we communicate on jobs, we win that fight. And if we communicate on Obamacare,
David, may I just say, this is the problem. This is, in my judgment, an extreme example, yet again, of gender bias. All we talk about is abortion when we talk about women. Women are leaders in this economy and in our political parties. Let's start treating them as whole people.
The debate will continue. We'll leave it there. Thank you all very much for being here.